from the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
Welcome to today's program. We've been doing this program now for almost 21 years, and from time to time we get to do what I call a humanistic story, and this is going to be a very, very special program, and as a matter of fact, we will continue with this same guest next week. We're so proud to welcome to our campus and to the North Idaho College Public Forum, Evelyn Venable-Mohr. Many of you will remember her film days. She is a film actress, and she starred in some very famous films in the 1930s, and she also continued her film work into the 1940s. And she's been so gracious to agree to come and be with us for a 2-week series. I would like to give you a more detailed background of our very distinguished and very special guest. Evelyn Venable was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, and grew up there, and she comes from what I would consider a literary family and the humanities. Her father, Emerson Venable, was a teacher specializing in English, and he also had a father, her grandfather, William Henry Venable, who was known in the literary world and did poetry and a lot of writing. So she started out early in life with a family that had taught her not only literature and the theater, but it moved on into, as I said later, the film industry. She attended Vassar College and later the University of Cincinnati, and she really became known at a very early age as a person with great talent when she joined Walter Hampton, who was at the time the most famous and well-known Shakespearean actor in the world, and she was on stage with him for a period of time. As I indicated, then she went to Hollywood and entered the film industry. Some of her movies that many of you will be familiar with, if you're from that period or if you've watched those classics since then, she was in Cradle Song in 1933, David Harmon with Will Rogers in 1934, Death Takes a Holiday with Freddie March in 1934, Alice Adams in 1935, and in that film with her was Katharine Hepburn, who has been a friend of hers over the years. And another one that you'll be very familiar with is The Little Colonel with Shirley Temple in 1935. Her last film was in 1945. She married Hal Moore, who was, like herself, renowned in his field as first a cameraman and a technical expert in films. He received 2 Academies, and the first one was in 1935 for Midsummer Night's Dream, and the second one was in 1943 for The Phantom of the Opera. So you can see we have such an incredibly rich background of our guest. And Evelyn, on behalf of our staff, welcome to the program. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, Tony. Thank you.
You're a very wonderful person, and we want to start out. We've got so much to talk about both this week and next week, and it's somewhat challenging to decide where to go first.
Yes.
Give us a little background of your childhood, because that was certainly a period that led to this later career. And other things that we're going to talk about that I haven't even mentioned, you have had more than one career.
Yes, I've had so many careers, I can hardly count them on my 2 hands. My childhood was simply wonderful. I was spoiled rotten. I was an only child, and I adored being spoiled. Somewhere along the line, my parents were very skillful, though, because in spoiling me, I think I didn't turn out to be one of those selfish, sassy, rude kind of brats that sometimes come out of a spoiling. But it was just great to be the only child and to have all the love and all the presents and everything else showered on you. At Christmas, my dad told me later that at my first Christmas at which I could speak, I went into the living room where the great big tree towered to the ceiling, and oh, it was so beautiful. And under it were so many presents, and we were a family of only 3 people, Mother, Dad, and me. And I took one look, and Daddy said, "Why don't you go and open one of your presents?" And I looked, and they said I pouted And I said, "Too many sings." And I went back up to my nursery, and I wouldn't go down again until late in the afternoon when they promised I would only have to look at one gift at a time.
Well, you were very thoughtful in the sense that you were not really going to be spoiled. You would be willing to be.
It wasn't really an actual determination of mine, but I guess it overwhelmed me.
I'm going to ask our staff to put some photographs on the screen that you brought with you, and
all right.
we're going to go through those. Then when we finish, and we'll be jumping back and forth in your life.
Okay.
But here's the first photograph. This is tell us about this when you were a child.
Oh, yes. Well, I was sitting on the front porch in front of our house. No, it looks as though I were on it's the front porch. And apparently I'd been picking flowers, and I was trying to put them onto a picture or something. But anyway, there's the old familiar pout when I was a little girl. And my hair was naturally that curly. I'm proud of that. My mother didn't have to roll it up in whatever.
When I saw that photograph, I thought of one of your friends that you were in the films with, Shirley Temple. You look so much like her. She had hair
A little
very much
bit,
like
yeah. More in the hair than in the face,
Yes.
I think. But look at the long stockings we wore in those days. Mother made every one of my dresses till I was 16 years old. She sewed like an angel, and I can't even put a hem in if I catch the hem of my dress. I have to pin it until my daughter comes over.
Because of her talent, you had a lot of clothes, and I'm sure you had a lot of input on what you were going to get.
That's right. Oh, yes. And you know, I still have some of those she made for me when I was 16 because I loved them so dearly. And I've gotten, as I got older, I've gotten shorter and lighter in weight, and I can wear them again. And I can't wait for summer to come to Idaho, to Coeur d'Alene. Then I can wear my 16-year-old clothes. I hope they won't be too silly. If they do, I'll have to give them away.
Now we have on the screen a very special letter. I introduced that your family was this remarkable and whole in you and all. Tell us about this letter from the President of the United States to your, I believe this was to your grandfather, wasn't it?
Yes. Which one is
this? This is President Benjamin Harrison.
Oh, Benjamin Harrison. Yes, grandfather had letters that I've found since. Now I still have boxes of things unopened, not unpacked since I moved into this house. But there were three. Harrison was one of them. They apparently greatly enjoyed grandfather's work and would write to him. His publishers would send the published volumes, you know, to everybody in sight, from the president on down to the garbage man.
This wasn't just a formal letter. This is a very personal, special letter.
Yes, a very personal letter.
To your grandfather, William Henry
Some of them
Venable.
then continued a correspondence and developed a friendship by letter, you know.
I think this envelope is very interesting. It's got your grandfather's name and it just says Cincinnati, Ohio, and there wasn't any zip code in those days.
No.
And up in the left-hand corner it says the Executive Mansion. Doesn't even have an address.
No.
So it was easy to get mail around.
Well, look
during
at
that period of
Cincinnati.
time.
Doesn't even have the street address. He was known in Cincinnati, and they didn't bother with that. And we lived actually in the suburbs, sort of outside of town. Well, far into the suburbs, where grandfather had built the home I grew up in, when it was really way out in the country. And yet the mailman never seemed to unable to find us. And even when I lived there till I was 16, as I told you, they would bring mail addressed to me just because the name was Venable.
Your grandfather also got letters from President Garfield and President Hayes.
Hayes,
so dinner and other things in your home with different people, you know, must have been very
It
very
was,
special.
I'm
Now,
sure.
Here is on the screen again, Evelyn, is the envelope again. And look, isn't that interesting?
Yes.
With no street address and no White House address.
That's the way it goes. Isn't
But
it?
everyone knows that 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue is where to get a return envelope. But these must be very special collections.
Oh, they're wonderful. Well, you know, my dad, before we moved to Los Angeles, gathered together all the original documents like this and manuscripts of grandfather and other poets in the area, and everything you can imagine, copies of books. And he presented them to the Ohio State Archaeological Society up in Columbus, and under the title, the Dolores Cameron Venable Memorial Collection. And they're there available for scholars and interested people, literary people, whoever. Periodically, I go up when I'm
going
able
to have to interrupt because we've got a wonderful on the screen, another photograph of you, and you can tell us about what period of time this was?
That was, I think, taken just before I went into the studios. The studio made this picture, but I had not yet done a picture or posed for
this would be kind
glamour
of like
stuff, you know.
Publicity in advance of that.
Yes, advanced publicity. It appeared in the papers in Cincinnati saying Evelyn Venable, signed with Paramount Pictures, and that sort of little notice in the papers at home.
So publicity is always very important as they're preparing.
Yes.
We have, in a moment, we'll have a photograph too of your friend Katharine Hepburn,
Yes.
and both of you. I've seen more than we can show here today from your albums and so forth. And you both were just absolutely beautiful human beings, and so it must have been so enjoyable to work with her.
She's a favorite of mine. I hope she lives to be 180. I know she's past 80, isn't she now? And just as great. I saw that last picture on Golden Pond, and I just adored it.
On this program, we had the grandson that played the grandson on Golden Pond.
Oh, did you?
Yes, Doug
Well.
McKeon. He was on the program.
Yes.
Now here's a photograph at your home with your husband, your late husband,
Yes.
Mr. Mohr.
Yes, that was early in our marriage. We lived in the home he already owned up in the Hollywood Hills on Quebec Drive. It was just a couple of miles south of the Hollywood Dam, and the views were spectacular from that home. It was lovely, and we had a patio at the entry and a lower patio. The hill was built on a house side. The house was built on a hillside, and this was having lunch out of doors in the lower patio.
A lot of nature around you.
Oh,
there,
look
wasn't
at the flowers and the shrubbery and then the wild grasses beyond our property. It was a beautiful sight, I thought.
I also believe that from that home or from your yard, you overlooked some property of a very good friend that actually introduced you and your, at that time, future-to-be husband.
Will Rogers.
Yes.
Yes, we looked across. Oh, no, it wasn't from this home. We moved, we sold this home and moved out to Pacific Palisades. Actually, it was West L.A., but they called it Pacific Palisades. And we had a lovely English home there, two-story home. We could look from the back of our lawn out across the canyon at the polo field and Will Rogers' property, and we saw him playing polo with his friends and heard them laugh across the canyon. We could hear the voices, and it was wonderful. We didn't know Will Rogers at that time, but later we both worked with him, because earlier we had...
Right. Because he had introduced you earlier.
Yes, he had introduced us early. I'm getting mixed up.
Here is a very special photograph. Tell us about this one.
Yes, Katharine Hepburn. That picture was made when I was already 9 months pregnant. And I was still able to, with the help of a little corsety type thing, to stand up straight and be photographed from the side, which I thought was kind of miraculous.
And that's you on the left.
Oh, that's me on the left.
Yes.
You know who it is on the right,
Yes.
Katie Hepburn. And she was so dear. I only had 2 scenes in that picture, but I wanted to work with Hepburn because, as I say, I've admired her all my life, as long as I've known about her. And she was lovely. She was lovely. She was reserved, but very gracious and nice, to work with. I liked that fact that she was reserved and didn't bubble all over the set all the time,
Yes.
unlike some of them.
Great talent, but those days were just very special days for all of you because you were selected very carefully at Paramount and these other.
That was kind of a nice honor that
Yes.
I
wasn't a long list like it is today of like
That's right.
television and so
That's
forth.
right. Yeah.
Yes, so
It was a treat to meet that lady, I tell you. And I didn't know her afterward. I'd never met her before or after, but I always felt terribly devoted to her, as an admirer, as a fan.
And I'm sure in those situations you learn from them. Now here is your late friend, Will Rogers.
Yes, that one.
Tell us the story about how he introduced you and your husband.
Well, yes. All right. They had started shooting on David Harum a week before I was to make my entrance in the role I was playing, which was the feminine lead, actually. And so when I did come on the set a week later to make the entrance, nobody thought to introduce anybody to anybody else. They all had met, you know. So I opened doors and stood there, and I had a beautiful dress on, all silk taffeta, and of course a period picture, and it was hand-painted, and it was just lovely, and I felt pretty lovely in it. And I opened the doors, and nobody said anything. So I saw a man standing beside the camera, kind of looking at me, and I thought, well, that must be the director of photography. So I went over there and put my hand into his and gave it a little squeeze. And he kind of tried to get it loose, and his hand loose. And I just held on real tight and kind of looked up at him as if to say, come on now, mister, you know. And he dug his toe into the floor of the studio. It wouldn't go in as though it were mud, but it reminded me of a kid's gesture. And then I said, aren't you going to say hello to me? And he said, well, hello. And I let go. I thought, I'm torturing this poor man too much. He had apparently, to his second cameraman, said when I opened that door, absolutely nothing. And Robert Surtees, who was his second man, said, well, Hal, say something. Don't you think this is pretty special? This is what we have in Cincinnati. Bob was from Cincinnati. And Hal looked, and he turned to Bob and he said, what do you mean, that heifer? Bob was outraged. He told me about it later. He realized Hal was teasing him, you know. But it wasn't longer than 2 weeks before Hal and I were engaged. And I meant that hand squeeze, mister.
And Will Rogers had brought you together that way and introduced you.
We figured that he had been the reason we met at all, and he was. And later, that picture, I think it was that you showed, on that he wrote to Evelyn and Hal from the old matchmaker, Will Rogers.
Isn't that special?
Isn't that sweet?
Yes.
Oh, he was a wonderful man, just wonderful.
Before we continue the conversation, we have one more thing we want to show our audience, and we'll just leave it here on the table, but you have brought a very, very special, we'll just leave it sitting right there, and they'll show it. That's on the camera. This is the Oscar that your husband won, one of the two. Would you tell us about it?
Yes. Well, this was the first one. He was given that for A Midsummer Night's Dream in the early 40s. Is it 43?
1935.
Oh, excuse me. The second one was in the 40s. Yeah, 1935. And I remember we had gone out, as we did every Saturday night, we had gone out to Flint Ridge, which was a fair distance from where we were living. And James Cruz, who directed David Harum, had his home out there. And so he had an open house Saturday nights. We were out there, and the phone rang, and Jim went to it, and he said, well, Hal, it's for you. Who knows you're here? And Hal took the phone, and he said, what? What? And I said, honey, what is it? And he said, we have to go home. We have to go home. And I said, is somebody hurt? He said, no, come. And we flew home. We were in just everyday clothes. We had to race home, get on formal clothes, Hal get into his tux, get downtown. They, at that time, held the Academy Award ceremonies in the Biltmore Bowl downtown next to the Biltmore Theater. And just as they were announcing that Hal had won this thing, we made our entrance, and he had to run all the way down the aisle and up on the stage to receive his Oscar. He had not been on the ballot, which is why he never expected to be called down there or to have to go down there. But there was such an enormous write-in vote by the members of the Academy who had seen this film that he won the Oscar. Subsequently, the Academy has made that illegal. You can only vote for pictures that have been nominated, you see.
He must be one of the few people that did win by
I think he was the only one, possibly, yes.
Tell us a little bit about the second Oscar that was won in 1943 for Phantom of the Opera.
Yes, that was, I thought, beautiful. It was interesting to me that he won first the Midsummer Night's Dream and then that, because the Dream was in black and white, of course, and it was a very specially beautiful film. Phantom of the Opera was in color. So it showed he had real genius in both mediums. And on that one, I was able to meet the star. We met Claude Rains and had a social life apart from the set with him. And I remember that beautiful Susanna Foster, who played the girl in Phantom. And it was just a wonderful experience. Hal enjoyed it so much. I remembered the old Lon Chaney movie, which I saw on television the other evening. It wasn't nearly as good as I remembered by comparison with the talkie and the, talkie, singy, dancey one that Hal did. But it was beautiful, and that's where we met Mickey Rooney and got to know him very well.
It was fascinating, but you and your husband both having such success and,
yes,
and reaching really very high in your profession, but also then at your meeting and working with others who were
so
very
many
successful.
people, because our social life was really not among the film people. Basically, we went to some of the big balls and things, that were held, like after the Academy Awards. But our friends were mainly professional people, like doctors or lawyers or businessmen. I mean, we weren't exclusive about professionals. But it was fascinating to have such a variety of friends instead of being confined just to the world in which we did our work, you see.
That's important.
Yeah, it is.
There's another area I want to go back to. We're having so much fun, and I know our viewers will be back with us next week, and next week we're going to talk about your film career and go through some of those films and show some photographs. But I want to go back to another time in your life when you were on stage and with the great Walter Hampton. Tell us, first of all, how you got involved with the theater, and if time permits, we'll talk about some of the things you did.
All right. Well, I got involved with the theater, first of all, by being a movie fan. I collected the photographs of some 400 actors, both silent pictures, and then as talkies came in, I was collecting. We always said, I'm collecting Valentino, I'm collecting Niels Astor, I'm collecting Garbo, this and that. I was collecting 400 people. It was hard even to remember to collect them. But that thing led me to want to be an actor. And when I was a junior in high school, I attended the same high school of which my father was the chairman of the Department of English. And it was a school that drew students by examination from all over the city rather than by locale in which they lived. And it didn't have a winning football team or any other kind of team that won games and made it distinguished. So the faculty in one meeting were talking together about how to give Walnut Hills a special place in the public eye, apart from the scholarship of the students. So Dad suggested putting on a Shakespearean play each year. Well, that sounded wonderful. And they did that for several years before I was ready for high school. But I went to Walnut Hills too. And when I was a junior, Dad persuaded them that they might leave Shakespearean comedy and venture on one tragedy, though the actors were going to be students and they'd be very young to play tragedy. And the tryouts, the parts were assigned purely by tryout, no favoritism nor anything. It just so happened that generally the people who won the leading roles were seniors. I was a junior, but I tried out for Juliet, and by golly, I won it. The judges were a committee of faculty.
So from that process, that was your introduction. And then take us to your meeting of Hampton.
All
yes,
right.
Please.
Well, Juliet my junior year, Rosalind my senior year, and by then I was gung-ho to go in the theater. I just had to. Dad had made the acquaintance of Walter Hampton because of Dad's book. He had sent a copy to Hampton, as he did to all Shakespearean actors and colleges and everything else in the country. And he had a note from Walter Hampton saying, Mr. Venable, your Hamlet problem and its solution, I think, is a solution for me, and I think it will be for other Shakespearean actors who have not quite understood the nature of the character, why he delayed so in killing the king. You've solved that. And I'd like to meet you when my company plays in Cincinnati in a few months. So Dad took Mother and me to see Mr. Hampden in the play, and we went backstage afterward. And I remember I was about 8, and Hampden had a beautiful basket of fresh fruit on his dressing room table. And he said, "Well, little Miss Evelyn, wouldn't you like one of these fruits?" And I saw a pomegranate. I knew the story of Proserpina and Hades, and I knew those Greek legends. And I said, "May I have the pomegranate?" And he said, "You can have anything you want." And do you know, I still have that pomegranate dried in its shape, pretty much in its shape, but the shell is completely dry, and you can rattle it and hear the seeds rattling inside.
But Mr. Hampden wanted you to try out, and
yes.
There's about 3 minutes left.
Yes. Yes. Later, when I had doing these Shakespeare plays, Dad wrote to Mr. Hampden, and he said, "My daughter is anxious to go into Shakespearean theater. She's played 2 roles in Cincinnati, and the plays were reviewed by professional critics, not, just the school, and got wonderful reviews. Could I bring her to Ridgefield when she graduates in June from high school and let her read for you? She wants to be in your company." And Mr. Hampden said, "By all means, come whenever you're ready. I'll be living in the summer in my home in Ridgefield, Connecticut with my wife, whose theatrical name was Venable-Mohr. She had played opposite him in all the plays he had done up until that time." So Mr. Hampden took us out to the barn. And Mr. and Mrs. Hampden and Dad were the only audience I had. And Hampden said,
I'm getting the signal that we're out of time.
So sorry.
The good news is we'll be back next week, and when we come back, we'll finish that story and then go into your film.
By all means. I'm sorry I talked so long.
No, it's wonderful. You're great, and thank you for being with us, and look forward to visiting with you next week.
I've absolutely loved it. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I know you found this just absolutely a fascinating program, and that our guest will be with us again next week when Evelyn Venable-Mohr will discuss some more of her Shakespearean days and then her film career. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Telemedia Services on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station. From the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
I want to welcome you back from last week. We have our same guest back, and it was such a fun program last week. And once again, for part 2, I welcome Evelyn Venable-Mohr to our program. And for you who were not with us last week, our guest has such a very special background. She was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, and she grew up in what I would describe as a literary family. Both her father and her grandfather were involved with poetry and literary writing. In fact, her father, Emerson Venable, was the chair of the English department at Walnut Hills High School in Cincinnati. Her grandfather, William Henry Venable, had written a lot during those days and was friends with presidents, including Benjamin Harrison, and we last week showed some of the correspondence they had. And with that rich childhood, she went on to be involved in the live theater. She worked with the most renowned Shakespearean of his time around the world, actor Walter Hamden. And following her days on the stage, she became a film actress in Hollywood. Last week I indicated once again what some of those very well-known films were. One was Cradle Song in 1933, David Harmon with Will Rogers in 1934, Death Takes a Holiday with Freddie March in 1934, Alice Adams in 1935 with Katharine Hepburn, and The Little Colonel with Shirley Temple in 1935. Her last film was in 1945. I failed to mention last week that she had over 20 years teaching at UCLA, both Greek and Latin. So our guest comes to us from an incredibly rich background of experiences and careers. Evelyn, once again, welcome to the program. We just had a great time, and I want to pick up where we left off last time because those viewers who are dedicated each week, they would not forgive me if I didn't let you tell the story. You were at the home, I believe, of Walter Hamden.
Yes, the country home in Ridgefield, Connecticut.
Yes. Tell us how you auditioned and became part of the theater.
Yes, I kind of didn't even finish the sentence last time we talked. But Mr. Hamden asked me to go up to the hayloft and pretend that was the balcony in Romeo and Juliet. And then where he and my father and Mrs. Hamden were seated below would be where Romeo was. Then I said, well, Mr. Hamden, will you give me Romeo's lines? He said, no, indeed. He said, I want to see not only how you deliver Juliet's lines, but how you respond to Romeo's, both physically and facially, and mentally, if possible. And I want you to imagine all those things. That'll give me an idea of how much imagination you have. And I thought, oh my goodness. But I said, all right, I'll do that. And so I proceeded. And at the end of my reading, I looked down at him and I said, was that all right, Mr. Hamden? And he said, never mind, come on down. So I came down. And he looked at Mrs. Hamden, who had in the past played all the leads opposite him, and kind of nodded, and he looked at my dad, and then he said to me, I would like to have you in my company. And my heart almost dropped out at his feet. I couldn't believe my ears. And I said, now? He said, no. He said, I understand you have a 4-year scholarship to Vassar, and I've already cast my company for this coming year. So you go on, take your scholarship, go to Vassar, get an education. He also said, I have some reading I want you to do. And he gave me the names of several books about people like Burbage, the man whose brother shot Lincoln. Help me.
Go ahead.
Who shot Lincoln? Oh, well, Edwin Booth.
Yes,
Yeah, he gave me books on all those people, and he said, I want you to read their stories and know about them because they're way ahead of our time. And incidentally, I have a portrait of Edwin Booth in color as Richelieu hanging in my home here in Idaho. But I followed his injunctions, and I went on back to school. But before I had completed, I finished the year at Vassar and hated every minute because it felt lopsided not to be in a coeducational school. There was nothing against the people there or the faculty or anything, but just I felt incomplete. So I told my dad I wanted to turn back the scholarship to the Vassar Club that had awarded it to me and go to the University of Cincinnati, which was co-ed. So I started my sophomore year there. Before it was even complete, that first semester of my sophomore year, I had the wire from Mr. Hamden saying, I would like you to come if you're interested in playing a bit part in Cyrano. We'll see how you manage yourself on stage, and if you do well, we'll wait and see what's to come. So I went back and I played the flower girl with one line in Cyrano de Bergerac, and a silent role that all the women in the play played in the final scene when Cyrano was dying, a nun, going past the convent yard where he was dying. During that time that we were doing Cyrano, in the spring, Mr. Hampton had tryouts for the following year, and he was going to do Hamlet. He knew I had Juliet and Rosalind from the high school years. I had played those with success, public success. And so he said he would have the tryouts for Ophelia, and he did, and my goodness sakes alive, didn't I win it? Can you imagine what bliss I was in?
And you had a wonderful career on the stage, and I wish we could go into it in more detail, but the clock's going to win out.
Oh, I know it will.
Let's go into your... That was such an incredible preparation
and
excitement for the film.
Wonderful.
And you've told me that I think you must like the theater even better than you did the film.
Well, I miss the close touch with the audience, emotional touch,
But tell us about, you went with Paramount and went into the film industry.
Yes. When we were playing Hamlet down at the Biltmore Theater, which no longer exists in L.A., but it was way downtown, the studios always sent scouts, for films, for the film companies, to see who was coming out of New York this year and would they be photogenic and all that. And they asked me to come to Paramount. We were laying off for Holy Week in Los Angeles, and they asked me to come out. And I made the test, and they employed me.
We want to ask the staff to put our first photograph up because we're going to take through some of the wonderful films you did. And
all right,
those some are just classics, and I know people are continuing to watch them.
They were wonderfully fun to make.
Yes, and as the staff puts up the film, here's the first one. Would you describe who this is and what film it was?
That was my second film, actually. Yes. The first was Cradle Song with Dorothea Wieck, beautiful German actress. This was Death Takes a Holiday with Frederick March, who was there with me. And it was a wonderful film because it is still revived and shown on television to this day. It's timeless for the reason that it's a fantasy. And a fantasy is like a fairy tale. There's no beginning or end of the time it would be received well by the public. So we did that, and it was so thrilling to me to be working with Frederick March because I had been a fan of his. One of those 400 people I collected when I was a little girl. Here he was. Oh, they called me the kissless girl, the publicity department at Paramount. And I was referred to that way in the newspapers and everywhere by the publicity department who spread this thing out. I was kissed very well for my very first picture and enjoyed every minute of it. So how I continue to be the kissless girl, I will never understand. And I don't think anybody else will either if they give it any thought. But it seems to be compatible in people's lives with my big kiss.
Some public relations is hard to understand. Here is another film. Would you identify this one for us, please?
Yes, The County Chairman. That was the second one with Will Rogers. And, Will was wonderful. I have a portrait of him at home, autographed to Hal and Evelyn from the old matchmaker, Will Rogers. And the reason he said that was that Hal photographed both David Harum, the first one, and the county chairman, this one, a year later. And it was right after this when I was working with Shirley Temple in The Little Colonel that Hal and I both had the same day free of our studio obligations.
And who's this on screen with you?
This
here?
is Kent Taylor.
Yes.
He and I did six films together. They kind of called us a team, though the studio never thought of it that way, apparently. But we did do 6 pictures in a row together.
Yes.
Kent went on later and he played Boston Blackie in a series. But I was not in pictures anymore at that time.
Yes. But you certainly have been in films with some of the very leading men of those
very
days.
Very nice ones. Yes, indeed I have. Oh, so many. Bob Young. You remember Bob? I think you have a photograph, don't you? You want to show it now?
I don't believe we can today. I think we laid it aside.
We've gone to pieces.
Yes, with on that. But you certainly have had.
Well, it's been a wonderful career, a wonderful life, a series of wonderful careers it was, and you've been a wonderful addition to my series of careers. This is my first time on television, And I hope I didn't make a fool of myself, as a beginner does.
You've been wonderful. But there is a lot of difference in different mediums, and you've had the experience with them all now. And of course, we talked about your stage.
Yes, until we go out into outer space to make films or something.
You've also done radio.
Yes.
Would you identify this? This is a very famous person that you're with.
Yes, that's Shirley Temple. And Hattie McDaniel played the Mammy in that picture. Of course, it was a Civil War days thing. Shirley was the little colonel who was my daughter in the film, and I was the daughter of the old colonel, who was played by Lionel Barrymore. And the cast was just beautiful. Bill Robinson, you know, the wonderful tap dancer, played the butler in the colonel's home, and he and Shirley did that marvelous little tap dance up and down. She was only 6 or 7 then, and a performer par excellence. She was a dancer, and she sang, and she didn't know she was a star. That amazed me. So many of the movie children, you know, were just full of themselves. They were spoiled and bratty and horrible to work with. I encountered a few of those in Mrs. Wiggs of the Cabbage Patch, a later film than this. But Shirley, her parents were very wise. They treated her just like an ordinary little girl. She thought she was just playing a game.
She was having fun, wasn't she?
Yeah, she was having fun. I was pretending I was her mother, and Lionel was pretending he was her grandfather, and Bill Robinson was teaching her how to dance on the stairs. She just loved it. And I think as long as I ever have heard of her, she's still unspoiled, you know. Smart parents.
Here is another film that you were in that you can identify.
Oh, that's the one with Bob Young, called Vagabond Lady.
I'm sorry, we did have him. I forgot that we put that up.
Yes, that's the Vagabond Lady with Bob Young. Now, this was a complete change of pace, I guess you'd say, for me as an actress, because in this, I had been kind of spiritual or sweet or, you know, ingenue stuff always before. And in this picture, Bob and I had a knockdown, drag-out fight, and it was not faked. We didn't pull any punches. I said, Bob, I'm going to really punch you. And he said, well, I'm probably going to punch you back then. I said, go to it. Beat me if you can. We fought standing up. We fell to the floor. One of us knocked the other down. I don't remember which. And then we fought on the floor. And we had the best time I think I've ever had in my life fighting a man, you know.
Didn't use any extras in that scene then, did you?
No extras, no doubles, no nothing. I was pleased, too, that I was able to ride horseback in several pictures without a double. I learned to ride side saddle for the Will Rogers pictures, and then I did a kind of a B picture, but I wanted to do it with Bill Boyd, Hopalong Cassidy, in which I had to run, and in these full period skirts, throw my leg over the horse and ride off madly in all directions. So I did that.
Oh, that's interesting. Now, here's someone who was special in your life. It's on the screen.
That's my Hal. That's my boy. Oh, yes, that's the way Hal looked when I first met him. We had 40 years together, during which we never had one fight.
It was a wonderful marriage.
We had disagreements. I mean, anybody who thinks has disagreements with somebody. But we never said those ugly things that you can't forget, even though you may forgive them. And I just loved that man. I still do. People say, why haven't you remarried in these 40 years? Because I'm in love with my husband. Is why, you know. I'm going to cry.
But you both had a wonderful career in the same field. And they're going to put up the screen in a minute also a photograph of you during this same period.
All right. That won't make me cry.
There you are, just a beautiful photograph.
I love that picture, yes. That's the way I looked when I attracted Hal.
Yeah.
And I think there's reason to believe I was attractive to him.
Just a wonderful, not only talent you have.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if you didn't change from those years?
Well,
I'd like to look like that.
But you also remember what great satisfaction you've given to so many thousands and thousands of people with your entertainment.
Yes, I look back on a very happy life, and if it has given happiness to somebody, that adds to my happiness. I'm just a happy hooligan.
Well, with film, it's in one way like television, in the sense that it can be preserved and
Yes.
can be passed on to other generations.
Yeah.
And there's been a real interest in recent years of both in the films from that period and television programs back in the 50s and so
Yes.
forth that are being rerun and played. And this reminiscing is really great for society.
You know, I feel as though I almost started a whole new career when I came up here, because everybody, and I was retired so long, you know, after my various careers. I had retired from my last one, which was teaching at UCLA. And I came up here and I seemed to be reborn and of interest enough for you to have me on today.
Well, here's a very special scene that's come up on the screen. You have your star
Yes.
in California. Tell
Yes.
us about this.
Well, this was a funny one. I went to when they installed my husband's star, and they had a very nice ceremony with the mayor of Los Angeles and all this there. But I didn't know that I had a star. That was installed at some time, totally unknown to me to this day, very near the exact front of the old Brown Derby, the first Brown Derby on Vine Street in Hollywood. And I learned about it only because a friend happened to see it and took this picture. And guess who the friend was? A director of photography named Stanley Cortez, who had been my husband's second cameraman when I worked in films. And Stan saw this one day and he said, "Hey, Evelyn has Hal's star. I bet she'd like her own." So he gave that to me, and it's hanging up now on the side of my fireplace, the great big stone fireplace I have in my present home, along with the other memento things and all of Hal's awards and citations and everything. It's nice. It's a memory chimney now.
And we're going to go into one of your other lives soon that you did after the film industry. But before we do that, give our viewers some idea of both the women and men that you played with, some exciting experience that was it's been such a permanent memory for you. I know that you and they both learned from each of your films and what you did, but what is something that really stands out?
When you mean new and exciting, like those, like the knockdown drag-out fight,
Yes.
or of a different sort?
Something that you felt such an inspiration from the person playing across the screen from you.
I started to feel that way with Frederick March. Let me go back to the first film, Cradle Song. I mentioned Dorothea Wieck. She had been brought over by Paramount specifically to play the nun in the Cradle Song. And she was exquisitely beautiful and a very lovely woman. And I felt so privileged to be able to play. As the child grew up, a baby was left at the door of the convent, and this particular nun asked permission to rear this child. And it turned out to be me. I started playing it when she was about 10 or so, with my hair down, you know, and then I grew up and we had the romance with Kent Taylor. And finally we left the convent. And my adopted mother, if you could call the nun that, and the picture closed with a close-up of her with tears in her eyes. Now I go again. But anyway, that was lovely. And when I started the second picture, Death Takes a Holiday, with Frederick March, I felt in awe of him because I had collected his pictures too as a fan, you see. Well, he was wonderful. He gave a great performance, I thought. The cast was magnificent in that film, as it had been in Cradle Song. And Sir Guy Standing, you know, wonderful people. Many of them from the theater, as I had come.
In those days, a lot of people came from the theater.
Oh yeah,
into
because
film.
the transition was still underway. Toward the tail end of it was between silent films and talkies. And unfortunately, a number of the silent film stars had voices that didn't match the public conception of them.
And a lot of people left the film and went back to the theater too,
Yes.
or back and forth.
Yes, and a lot of them just changed professions entirely because they couldn't speak for film, so they couldn't speak for stage, you see. But It was great, and I adored Freddie. And in that final scene, almost the final scene, where she confesses to this prince she believes he is, that is death playing a human being on his holiday, Frederick Marge, that she has loved him so much she wants to go away with him. He has come, he said he's on a visit from a faraway land. He's really death taking a holiday, you see, from killing. No leaves fell, nothing happened during these 3 days of the story. And he said, no, I can't take you with me. And she says, please, and then leans back on the couch, and Freddie, still in his disguise as this prince, leans over her, and he took a great big handful of my chest in his. And, you know, automatically, Tony, my fist came up from where my hand was hanging languid here. My fist came up and caught him right on the point of the jaw, knocked him on his canetta, and he looked at me, and he was furious. He got up and stamped into his dressing room, and he sat down, and he wouldn't come out and finish the scene. Am I running too long?
No, it's fine. Go ahead.
And the director came over to me, Mitchell Lyson. Mitch had also directed Cradle Song, and he knew me pretty well. He said, Evelyn, you've got to go and apologize to Freddie. He will not come out and finish this scene if you don't. And I said, Mitch, you're so wrong. He has to come and apologize to me. After all, I didn't offend him. He said, you hit him on the jaw. And he said, because he outraged me. He owes me the apology. So I said, I won't finish the scene either until he comes and apologizes. Well, after a while, it was a pretty long time, and it cost the studio thousands of dollars per second, you know, to have the whole company waiting like that.
And he did come and apologize, but they gave me a scene. We don't have much time. I don't want our viewers not to hear about. You went to teach at UCLA, and you taught Greek and Latin.
Yes.
Give us a short discussion of that.
Well, I had left, as I told you earlier, I left college in order to go on the stage. So when my daughter, I returned, and as an undergraduate, I entered UCLA as a sophomore, 20 years after I had left Vassar as a freshman. And my daughter was about to enter UCLA, and I wanted to, just because I was the mother, I wanted to get my degree before she did. So she kind of chased me through, and I had to declare a major, which had not been necessary when I was first in college. They said, what will your major be? And I thought, well, Dad always told me, don't teach English, you'll go blind grading compositions. And I knew that was true because I used to grade some for him. So I thought, well, I've had more Latin. I had had 6 years of Latin and 3 years of Greek in the public high school. So I said, well, I'll major in Latin.
And you did. I'm getting a signal we're about out of time. But you taught both Greek and Latin for over 20 years at UCLA.
Almost 25 years, and I retired in 1980.
So you've been an educator as well as a film actress and
I
stage.
told you I had a whole series of careers.
Yes. It's been such a pleasure having you on our program, and you've been so kind and gracious with your time and with your
May I shake your paw?
Oh, you certainly may.
I've enjoyed it so much. What actor doesn't enjoy talking about himself, you know?
Well, you've been
But you're
wonderful.
a great interviewer.
Well, thank you, and thank you for being with us these 2 weeks.
No, I've loved it.
Ladies and gentlemen, our guest has been Evelyn Venable-Mohr, who had many careers, and she's best known for her film work in the 1930s and 1940s. I know you've enjoyed our program very much, both this week and last week, and I'd like to invite you to be with us again next week at this same time when we will discuss what is an important issue. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Telemedia Services on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.